Hi guys, this is Jack from Jack's Transmissions. We're now on part 3 of our data logging videos. What we're going to show you now is shifting fork positions. It's actually very simple on how this works, but let's explain a little bit how the system works so you get an idea as to why it behaves in the way it does. So the selector valve body here, we have shifting pistons which move back and forth to engage and disengage the gear. Here's the fork. The fork sits on the shifting piston. As the shifting piston moves back and forth, so does the fork. The fork actually attaches to the synchro sleeve on the gear cluster and engages and disengages the gear. Now the problem with this design is, I don't know why Nissan did this, but instead of limiting the throw of the piston when it's engaged in the gear, it limited the throw by putting stops on the synchro sleeve. So basically the piston has too much throw, the fork has too much throw, and the only thing to stop the system from going too far are these little stops on the synchro itself. So to combat that, what we did is we installed stops inside our main valve body, or our selector valve body, to prevent overextension of the fork and synchro sleeve. So if you have a CBA with this weak synchro sleeves that have the weak stops that always break, this resolves that issue because it's no longer slamming the stops. And what's the beauty of this design is if you limit the piston throw, it's no longer bottoming out on the sleeve or the fork, and it's taking pressure away from that system. So once the gear is selected, everything sits there at a nice idle position and it no longer has a constant pressure. So you don't have as much fork wear, you don't have to worry about breaking a fork, and whether you have a CBA or DBA, you never have to worry about the synchro sleeve. So it's really nice. And our design in this valve body is considerably different than what others have come out with, where people install shims in the valve body, and the shims can actually rotate and limit the throw of the piston and cause some errors. Our fix doesn't do that. It's a totally different design, and it's a very reliable design. So another problem with having the system bottom out like this on the gear cluster is as you load and unload the gear cluster, as you're on and off the throttle, the gear cluster has thrust load. It'll move forward and back. So as the fork is engaged and that's moving forward and back, you're putting pressure on the fork, pressure on the synchro sleeve, and the piston is actually moving back and forth as well. So it's not good for the system. Plus you have things like engine harmonics going through there that basically beats everything up as you're driving it. It's just not a good design. So the beauty of this is by limiting the throw, the gears can have some thrust movement, and the harmonics from the gear set will not transfer into the fork, which adds to the longevity of your trans. So knowing about this, if we look at the valve body, as we know through previous videos, we have a series of magnets inside the pistons which this sensor can sense. So the further away the magnet is, the lower the voltage, the closer the magnet to the sensor, the higher the voltage. So it's very simple. If we look over at the graphs here on the data log, very simple on how this works. So if a piston is moved over where the magnet is closest to the sensor, it'll go up this way. If we're in a neutral position, it'll be in the middle. If we're over on the far end, it'll go down. So that's it. It's just that simple. So if we look at, position sensor 1R in millivolts here, which is gray, we'll see that all the way up here, we're in first gear. When it goes into neutral, it's in the middle, and then when it's all the way down in reverse, it'll go down this way. So that's it. Basically, that's the movement that you're looking for. That's it. It's just as simple as that. If something's stuck in the middle and won't move, you may actually have a CBA with a broken piston stop. That's pretty common. Or if you're doing like a pull and it feels like the car's popping out of gear, data log the pull, you'll see a nice line as it's engaged in the gear as you do the pull, but when it pops out, you'll actually see the shift fork pop out of gear. That's it. So it's pretty straightforward. Now the reason we have these two up is to actually show our modification to the the selector valve body. It's pretty dramatic. So as you can see here with these jagged lines, this is stuff from harmonics and gear movement when it's in gear, when everything's bottomed out. Look at all that. Look at how much of a mess it is. When it's engaged in this gear, when it's loaded, you can actually see the gear thrust movement. So it's loaded here, unloaded, it moves, and then it's loaded again. So you can see everything's moving around, everything's under strain. We go over here to this data log with the stops. Look at how much smoother and happier everything is. It engages fully in the gear, and there's no thrust movement. There's no thrust movement because the throw is limited, and the fork and synchro sleeve is no longer bottomed out on the gear set. When it selects the next gear, nice and smooth. Now that's a very happy trans, and that's the trans that'll never break a fork. You know, never have synchro sleeve stop issues. It's you know, it's just one of those little reliability updates we do as standard procedure in all our transmissions, whether it's CBA or DBA. You know, just to make it so that the thing just won't break on you. I hope this made sense. Please visit us on our DCT Facebook page. We also would appreciate any input from our email, sales@jackstransmissions.com. If you have any questions about how to data log this stuff, turn it into a graph, or if you're having a problem, please reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to help. That's about it.